Welcome everyone to the Legalize Therapeutic Psilocybin campaign presented by TheraPsil and Heroic Hearts here. Thanks for joining webinar 3, where we're going to chat about psilocybin therapy for veterans. And this will be the first part of a 2-part series. Is over the next 2 weeks. We discuss how veterans in Canada and around the world have been using psilocybin to help with, among other things, the treatment of PTSD. So thank you everyone for joining. Just in the chat box, feel free to pop in where you're coming from. It's always nice to see how far our reach is and who's signing in from where. Again, thank you for joining. And just a bit of house cleaning stuff here. If you're going to be asking questions, you can do that in the Q&A box on the bottom right of your screen. It's just a nice place to ask questions, and we'll make sure that we get to those. And then if you just want to chit chat and maybe comment and encourage people on, feel free to do that in the chat box. All right, so let's get started here. And just to start, I want to make a land acknowledgement as I'm looking around here in beautiful Victoria. I want to acknowledge that that's where I'm conducting this Zoom from. And it is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Saanich people. And furthermore, I also want to realize that it is that psilocybin, and as we're working to legalize it, we recognize and acknowledge the entire field of psychedelic medicine really wouldn't exist without the Indigenous knowledge keepers. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to first kick us off with an agenda for today's webinar. First, we'll start off with the campaign and speaker introduction. I'll let everyone know about the campaign that we've been working on, and then we'll introduce folks. We'll then jump into our general discussion about psilocybin therapy for PTSD, and we'll talk about why this treatment option is needed. Then we'll jump into how veterans and other folks in Canada can access psilocybin, both through Section 56 for possible regulations, and then we'll go through the final ways to support. Thank you, and Q&A. So to start off, I just want to again acknowledge that the campaign we are working on, and the reason for it is because as of today in Canada, there are 35 patients and 19 healthcare professionals with exemptions to use psilocybin. Now that number is just a very small fraction of those who are in need. At current, we've got about 17 patients and 40 healthcare professionals who have been waiting up to 5 months. But again, we are a limited team, and those are only a number out of the thousands that have messaged us seeking access to psilocybin, either for treatment or training purposes. Because of this, we've decided to set a goal at TheraPsil, and that goal is an argument and a proposal for regulations in Canada. We're very lucky, and we stand on the shoulders of giants in this country who have helped in similar social and rights movements get people access to things like cannabis and medical assistance and diet. And we acknowledge that the reason we are here doing this and asking for regulations is for the same reasons that those folks were. Is we want safety, safe supply, trained professionals. We want quality, and that is timely and equal access for all patients, not just 55 Canadians, but all Canadians. And we also want to work with the government, not against them, so that we can hopefully skirt around what was a 20-year battle for access to things like cannabis and access to MAID, and instead work with the government in order to find regulations that support Canadians. So this week, we are broadening our psilocybin access, and this is really our first public webinar where we've talked about really anything other than psilocybin for palliative or remission cases. So we will be doing that over the next couple of weeks as we talk also about addiction, anxiety, depression, and cluster headaches. But without further ado, let's jump in to psilocybin for PTSD and veterans who have used it. And we can just get started. We're going to keep this really just relax, and we'll maybe go around the room and have introductions from the key panelists. So Kelsi, you're first on my screen. I'd love an introduction and to hear a bit about your story.
So my name is Kelsi Sheren. I am the CEO of Brass and Unity and host of the Brass and Unity podcast, where we discuss mental health with individuals who are a little bit out of the ordinary, different types of individuals, everyone from Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, celebrities, and more. But really what I do is I'm a veteran who served overseas in Afghanistan and sustained an injury. And due to that, I was told I could never work again. I started this company 5 years ago now, where we have products, sunglasses, and jewelry. And what we do with those is we use those as a vehicle to fund charities that are doing the hard work on the front lines with first responders and veterans. So we donate 20% of the net proceeds to help fund these organizations. I have been an advocate for not only psilocybin, but cannabis for some time now. Long before cannabis was legalized, I was screaming about it due to the fact that I was a young person who wanted to have a child, but was unable due to the laundry list of pharmaceutical medications I was prescribed by the VA. I was not functioning and I was not well. And cannabis helped me to alleviate that. And because of that, I am now free of all pharmaceutical medications due through assistance through psilocybin, cannabis, and now and recently ayahuasca. So my goal as an advocate and an individual within this veteran community, and hopefully soon to help with TheraPsil in any way we can, Brass and Unity's goal is not only to help veterans and first responders, but it's to bring awareness to the fact that psychedelics and things like psilocybin are saving people's lives, and we need to be using them. Like I said earlier before this, the war is over, but the bill is due. And we need to start looking after those individuals that just put up for it. And we need to be holding those accountable and getting regulations in place so that we can do things like that.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. And it's an amazing introduction and story. And I'm sure that there are lots of questions coming from the crowd. I know I've got some. So we'll come right back to you. I guess next on the list here is Erin. Erin, it'd be great to hear about yourself, what you've done and your story and how you got here.
My name's Erin Victory. I spent 14 years in an operational infantry battalion deployed to Haiti and Afghanistan, and was lucky enough to hang out in some reconnaissance and sniper subunits. I got out in 2016 due to some blast trauma and a traumatic brain injury I sustained on my last tour. And immediately after went into the cannabis industry. And then shortly after that started focusing on psychedelics, and currently the chief strategy officer of a drug development company called Apex Labs out of Vancouver. And we're focusing on veterans and running a phase 2 clinical trial on the base molecule of psilocybin, psilocin, and the effect in PTSD in the Canadian veteran population. My advocacy, I work with Wounded Warriors Canada and the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence, which is an organization consisting of 3 entities. It's Veterans Affairs for the funding with Master University and Hamilton Health Sciences, and they run randomized control trials under the umbrella of chronic pain and the veteran community in different modalities, to, chosen to see what their effect are. And cannabis is the first one that was chosen. So a little bit about me. Oh, and I sat on the board of directors of Heroic Hearts Project Canada recently. So that's how I find myself in the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sheren. And that's the perfect segue over to Jared. So Jared, I guess you're kind of our rep here from Heroic Hearts, but nonetheless, I would love to hear about your story and how you wound up on this webinar with us.
So my name is Jared Reinhardt. I am from the United States. I'm currently living in Missouri. I was a United States Marine for 5 years. I was in infantry battalion, 2-7 to be specific. I was a machine gunner, and when I got out of the Marine Corps, life was not sunshine and rainbows. Let's just say that. It was. I was very upset. I had really bad anger issues. I had a hard time kind of integrating into civilian world. I was going through a divorce. It was just a really rough time for me, and I didn't really know what to do. So the only thing I knew what to do at that point was to look for a contract. And I went to Afghanistan for a year, and then I came home for about 8 more months. And then I went to another contract in Iraq for 3 years, and back and forth doing that. In that time when I was in Iraq on a contract, I discovered ayahuasca, and that, long story short, I went to an ayahuasca center when I was in Iraq. It completely altered the perspective of my reality. I didn't do it in Iraq. I did it in Peru on leave. And then I came home for about a week. And then I went right back to Iraq for 9 months after I drank ayahuasca. And in that time period, I really held true to the internal work that I had learned there. and applied it to the reality that I was in Iraq as a security contractor. And it completely altered the space around me from a war zone into a place of friendship and love and compassion, at least in my perspective. And that changed the whole game for me. And after that had happened, I decided I didn't want to do this anymore. So I quit being a contractor and moved to the jungle, met Jesse after about 9 months of living in Pucallpa, working with the Shipibo tribe. Met Jesse, who's starting Heroic Hearts, and then he asked me to be his integration coach. And so here I am today in this conversation, representing Heroic Hearts, the United States, as the lead integration coach.
Well, that's amazing. And I realize that as this is partnership with Heroic Hearts, and for those out there who may have been following TheraPsil, I mean, it's clear that all three of you are connected to Heroic Hearts. And I'm wondering if I can ask, and maybe Jared, you're the best person to answer this, but can you let me know and the audience know what is Heroic Hearts and what's some of the work that they've done?
Heroic Hearts Project is a nonprofit that its 100% mission is to connect veterans to psychedelic healing medicines and in proper ceremonies that have with people who have been vetted and trained, so that way they can receive healing through these medicines. And what we do primarily now is we send veterans to ayahuasca retreats and soon to psilocybin retreats for healing of PTSD or combat trauma.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I guess Kelsi, and when you had been introduced to me, you had said that Heroic Hearts had saved you, and was wondering if you might be able to share a bit about your journey with us.
Yeah, no problem. I had been struggling for a long time, as many vets do. PTSD, it comes and it goes. Most of the time, there's a lot of symptoms stay, but it ebbs and it flows in the severity, and what I mean by comes and goes, and the triggers, and depending on what's going on in life. And for me, I was at a point last year, as many were during COVID, where the struggle was really getting to everyone, whether it was financial, business, family, whatever it may be. And it was getting to me. And fortunately, due to my podcast, I got an opportunity to sit with someone named Matthew Griffin from Combat Flip Flops, who's also an Army Ranger. And he kind of spoke to me afterwards and said, listen, you look like you're struggling, and you look like you're lying about it. And I want to know, have you ever thought of doing any different type of healing modalities that were outside of the realm of pharmaceutical? And I said, yes, I do this. I use cannabis. It's just not enough anymore. And he saw right through me when I said that. And he said, listen, there's a great group called Heroic Hearts, and I want you to talk to them, and I want you to just keep an open mind. And so I got on the phone very promptly with Jesse from Heroic Hearts, and he asked me very openly, have you done psychedelics? Have you ever experienced psychedelics? And I said, yes, from a very limited standpoint, but yes, I have. And he says, well, how ready are you for healing? And I said, I need it, or I'm not going to be here much longer. And I got the opportunity to go on a retreat with Heroic Hearts of January of this year. And it was, I traveled out of country for that during COVID, which was a treat. And I got the opportunity to go and meet with this incredible group, which was all veterans, and was welcomed in with open arms in a way that I have never been welcomed in by any military in my life, besides the British. And I was taken by my hand and sat down with an assistant named Garrett. And he looked me in the face and said, what do you expect from her? And I said, whatever she's willing to give me, just help me, please. And I walked in with an open mind. And I walked out of that first ceremony, seeing the other side, seeing the mountaintop, her showing me so much more. And from that moment on, I knew that suicide would never have to be the option for me ever again. So Heroic Hearts has been the reason I'm here. And I'm so proud and thankful to be able to speak about that on behalf of them.
Well, thank you so much for telling your story, Kelsi. I really appreciate that. And I want to give both Jared and Erin also an ability to speak about their story and share as much or little as they'd like. So Erin, I'll send this over to you, and would love to hear a bit about your personal experiences with psilocybin or psychedelics or even cannabis, as I know that that's something that you've been an advocate for quite a while.
Absolutely, yeah. More all the non-traditional, different types of treatment methods interest me, mostly to the fact that, a lot of veterans were put on multiple prescriptions for a lot of years and realized that and the combination of talk therapy was absolutely not the path. So they were willing to do other things like travel to traditional ceremonies in ayahuasca in Costa Rica or Peru with heroic hearts. And in my case, I had recreational experience when I was younger with psilocybin, but I had never took it in a therapeutic way. And then started, through the education process over the last 2 years of just corporately, my job is to know these things and what's going on. And then, with a traumatic brain injury, and the results of that and the symptoms of that, and then trying to take a company public, and then have two children and just live life. And like Kelsi was saying earlier, in COVID, was looking for something different, and started researching the stacking method. So I started microdosing psilocybin as an introduction therapeutically, and I take 100 milligrams 5 days a week, and Saturday and Sunday are a rest for the receptors, and combine that with a link between the mental and physical. I train about 6 times a week. I meditate daily, and combined with medical cannabis and psilocybin and other tools in the toolbox, I'm the same as Kelsi. I was on 5 different types of pharmaceuticals, SSRIs, and then pills for my stomach and sleeping pills, and the 90% cocktail for people that were in the global war on terror and were in the Canadian or UK or US military, the Five Eyes community. So my experience has mostly therapeutic been with microdosing, but with the Section 56 exemption, I know that the dosing is much higher, under the protocols that, I would be taking it in. And the psychedelic assist to a therapy is something that is of interest to me. For a decade, I was EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, like what, Howl at the Moon, Primal Scream, like basically whatever was going, I ran through it. So it would be interesting for me to see the difference between that, which I feel like I'm past, and something with the psychedelic assist, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or EMDR. So it would be interesting to me to see what the difference was with the psychedelic assist.
Thanks, Erin. And Jared, I realized that you've talked a bit about your experiences going to Peru after Iraq. Is there anything else you wanted to add to your experience?
Yeah, it was when before I drank ayahuasca, I had worked with those psychedelics before. I had worked with mushrooms, and I had also worked with a little bit of DMT. And in those cases, like with Erin, those were not a therapeutic setting; those were more of a recreational setting. And I found that these were easy to compartmentalize into a drug experience, not into a therapeutic or healing experience. I didn't have anybody to bounce them off of. People would just kind of talk. If I talked about it, they would just be like, "Oh man, you were really messed up at that party or at that thing we were doing," as opposed to, and if I did go through something that was difficult, I didn't look too far into it. I just looked at it. Oh, that was a bad experience. I don't want to think about it. It wasn't until I drank ayahuasca and was with the facility that I was at and had trained individuals who knew how to help me dig deeper into the inward experience of these experiences that really unlocked the healing ability for me. So that showed me that the mindset that we have as a culture going into these and what direction we put as far as the usage of these medicines, that really will determine how they will be used and what they're going to be used for. And to lose sight that they also can be used for recreation, I think is putting halfway it out there, because it is going to happen. But what I would like to see in the future is the same kind of training and due diligence that was put on in these centers that I have worked at and worked with in the States, in Canada, in Europe, in all these other places, that have them accessible, because not everyone can afford a trip to Peru. Not everyone can afford a trip to another country and do these things. And to be honest, if we can afford to send troops overseas and we can afford to do all that, we can afford to at least pay for their treatment in the States or where they're from at home, as opposed to having them have to go back to another country for this treatment. Like you have to send a person who's already mentally unstable on a plane to another country to travel alone to go through this crazy experience just for their own personal healing when they sacrifice their mental capability for their community itself. So I know that doesn't talk about my experience, kind of got up on a segue there, but I do feel like that it's not just the psychedelics itself, it's the connection that we have with others that really shifts the healing for us. As Kelsi said, she'd never been welcomed into a group like that ever before in her life. So it's not just the medicine, it was the love that she felt from the people around her that allowed her to feel loved by the world again. So if we can transfer that and bring that kind of community and that kind of centers or that kind of training into a healing space, I think that's the direction we'd like to go.
Well said, Jared. And that's amazing. I mean, something that I keep hearing from each of you is that throughout your experience, you were supported. And there were healthcare practitioners, there was Heroic Hearts, and that's why we partnered here with Heroic Hearts is they share a very similar mission. It's to support people with their psychedelic use, and in our case, it's psilocybin. But I don't see that as the main issue, is that there are people here who are using plant medicines or natural substances to heal. And so infrastructure is obviously a really important part. To me, that's what Heroic Hearts is, right? And that's what TheraPsil is it's the infrastructure that is, that exists in a void right now. And that void is absolute prohibition. And I think, as Kelsi said perfectly, the bill is due. And the role of Health Canada, of our public healthcare systems, in fact, quite frankly, even the role of things like the Canadian Drugs and Controlled Substances Act, it is not to prohibit, but it is to ensure safety and things like equality and make sure that people are being helped. So with that in mind, I mean, as a veteran, what are some of the key pieces of infrastructure that you notice that is needed, right? And you've each been through your experiences. I mean, how important is it to have doctors, therapists that are supporting you, or even just, in your case, it might have been a shaman that had helped you. How important were those people and were the community that you got in touch with? And I will put that out to anyone who wants to answer here, any of you. I don't want to keep going in circles.
I guess I'll go first. I think that the support system is absolutely, it's fundamental. One of the key things that I felt when I got home from the military was alone. I felt alone in a room full of people who loved me very, very much, and I couldn't feel them anymore. So to have anybody who felt like they were trying to help was detrimental to my healing. And it's unfortunate because, like, the VA, for instance, they're overworked. They don't have enough people, they don't have enough money, they don't have enough time. There's just not enough for them, and they're doing the best they can with the archaic laws that we have to this day. A lot of them are probably proponents to what we are talking about, but their hands are tied because of, like you said, the void of prohibition. So I think that the support is so important. And this is one of the things with integration is we work with the veterans, is that making sure they have a good support system when they get back home after ceremony, because if they don't, it can easily slide back into old patterns and old habits.
Kelsi or Erin, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Jared's exactly right. After I went with Heroic Hearts, like that wasn't the end of the conversation. The conversation continued when it came time. We met monthly, we met weekly, we discussed, we still talk, we're in groups. Integration is the biggest part of it. And for me, when I got home, it's the exact same thing. I can't echo it. This is an echo that is not being heard. You feel alone when you're home because no one contacted me for 6 months. I was sent home on a plane by myself to a hospital with no one there. You're a number. And unfortunately, the way that our government system works, especially with veteran affairs, a lot of our things are being outsourced to insurance companies. And when they're outsourced to insurance companies, we all know how insurance companies work. We need to change legislation so that it allows for people like Veterans Affairs to step in and say, hey, we need to make things better. We need to have our hands untied to allow the actual help that needs to be given to these vets. Unfortunately, you're getting case managers that have 50 to 70 veterans. My case manager has 50 vets alone that she is supposed to visit and see and contact and keep up on. There's no way that's possible for her own mental health, but for others, they're not being serviced properly. And that's a lack of knowledge all the way up the chain. And when I say chain, I mean chain of command, because at the end of the day, our prime minister, he's our chain of command. Our minister of national defense is our chain of command. And when the behavior starts at the top and people aren't taking us seriously, that we need help, when they say 22 suicides a day, that's not the real number. That's the number we can calculate. That is the trackable number. That is not the number of people that take their lives and we don't find out that it was a suicide. We've left our vets to handle things on our own because legislation has not allowed us to heal and use the things properly in order to fix the vets. The problem really comes down to the system itself is quite broken from a veteran standpoint. We've been in a war for 20 years. We've had multiple different prime ministers over multiple different policies, and yet we have never looked seriously at how to heal these people because it was about turnover. We need people. So at the end of the day, we need support systems put in place. We need doctors that are going to take us seriously and not just blush us off. We need Veterans Affairs to stop denying claims when we have real data backing these vets. When we know cannabis can work, when we know psilocybin can work, we just need our hands untied. We'll fix our own problems, but give us the opportunity and tools to do it. We're not asking for you to fix us. We'll fix ourselves, but let us do that.
Give us the liberty, the same liberty that, to me, the three of you fought for, right, should be given back to you. And for sure, I mean, one of the things that we've battled, right, is where's the data, where's the research? And in a way, the research, the data, it's in the individuals coming to you who it is your duty to protect, right? As our government does, as Health Canada, it's them who are saying this is our medicine. And liberty, I mean, in Canada, we're blessed to have our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Section 7 that says each Canadian is, entitled to life, liberty, and security of persons. And, to have to fight again over 20 years to get access the same way we did to cannabis, just to realize that what applied to cannabis will likely apply to psilocybin, right? Your liberty to make your own medical choices and to use the medicine that's helping you. That's the shame. And really, thank you, Kelsey, for saying that, because that's what we're here to fight, right? We're here to make sure that we don't have to take this to the courts and to call out people like, Trudeau, the Prime Minister, whoever that may be.
I have no problem with that.
In our case today, Patty Hyju, right? She is the health minister who can support us. So, Erin, I know that you've also done a ton of work with wounded warriors, with heroic hearts, and McMaster, the research you've done. What supports do you see are totally necessary here? And I know that you've got quite a few medical professionals that have supported you as we've sent your Section 56 in. Is there any comments you want to make on that?
Specifically in the conversation of Canadian veterans and access to psilocybin through Section 56 exemption is, if I get approved for my Section 56 exemption, I'm immediately have to go into source my product illicitly. There's no regulated source currently for that product. So, regulations in place for me to access that. So I don't have to go through Section 56 exemption, which is not, it's not a viable pathway for, maybe it's dozens of patients, but it's not a viable pathway. It's not permanent. The regulations, the draft regulations that, David thing that TheraPsil has just released is, I believe the starting point in the conversation to have regulated access in all psychedelic experiences. Set and setting is very important. If we could do this with trained therapists in an environment that was Health Canada regulated, I believe that would be the best path forward. But the only other option is to source, is the health minister will bless me, and then I'll turn and immediately source psilocybin from the illicit market.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it is an important question here. I mean, through the work that you've all done, and I mean, you're all three of you remarkable people for going against the advice of doctors and obviously the advice at the time, taboos and and finding your own way to heal. Now today, you may not have to go against that advice because there are doctors and therapists, very limited few who are able to help you. And I know this is something and a part of the conversation now that we're about halfway through this webinar that we want to get to is enough about the stories. I mean, there's so many stories, there's so many, there's so many instances where people have used things like ayahuasca or psilocybin to help them. But what's next? And this is the same question that we've asked, our minister and that you've all brought up, right? Is what's next? How do we get the support? When is the bill due? How is it due? And what is next here is for sure a movement beyond Section 56. Section 56 has supported 55 Canadians now, and with over 80 others waiting in Section 56, and perhaps many, many others. I only know how many we've submitted, but I can only assume that others have submitted exemptions too. It either seems that Section 56 is unable to carry the load of Canadians who need access. And if that's the case, then there needs to be something more permanent. I know back in the 2000s, after the first couple exemptions were given for cannabis, it was the courts who had ruled that was no way to handle something as important as medical access to cannabis, and they did force regulations. So as TheraPsil is definitely going to be supporting a number of veterans, we certainly want to hear from all of those who are looking for access, because what we do and what has worked last year and what I'm confident will work this year is we need to raise our voices and be loud, and unfortunately go into another fight here now with the government, and not be quiet. And my hope is that it does not turn into a fight. The hope is that we can simply say, hey, we are here and need access, and that they will respond. But something we've made clear is that there are patients who are willing to go to court if that's necessary. But obviously no one wants to go to court, not when the other option is the democratic system we have where government listens to doctors and patients. So beyond Section 56, which we're very happy to be supporting and will continue to support, I think this is a perfect segue into the regulations that we've set up. As you can all imagine, that's what's given you access to cannabis. I don't think any of you got cannabis access through Section 56, but rather through the medical access. So we've got David Wood on this panel as well, who, with the help of a couple of us at TheraPsil, including a number of patients, have put together medical access or regulations for medical access to psilocybin. And David, I was wondering if you might give us a high-level overview of what those regulations are and why they're necessary.
Yep, happy to, and thank you very much for involving me. And it's wonderful to listen to the stories by these three veterans. This has been a great webinar for me to listen to so far, and happy to be a part of it. So, as your opening slide said, equality and safety are important, and the subsection 56(1) exemptions have helped some people, but they're an ad hoc system that are in which access, and it's not even really access, as you pointed out, it's authorization to possess, but no access really, unless one forages wild mushrooms. That is the one way that it is possible for access to happen without anybody breaking the law. But as we know, there isn't real access, and because the products are not regulated, there's no real safety. And because it's uncertain whether access will ever be granted in any given case, that diminishes safety, and it certainly doesn't speak well to equality. So as with cannabis, prior to the Cannabis Act, we've drafted a system that we've drafted regulations that would make a system possible where products that include psilocybin could be made available to Canadians through a medical access program that would be implemented through regulations under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. And I think a real strong feature of the regulations we proposed is that they do follow the cannabis blueprint, where you have a product that has an active ingredient. You have a product that has to be labeled very clearly for that ingredient, where there's very clear boundaries around what the product can and cannot have in it, much like a drug product, but yet where there is no therapeutic claim. The product's made to certain specifications, but there's no therapeutic claim associated with the product as there would be with a drug product or a natural health product in Canada. If that system were implemented, then the products would be manufactured by license holders who would be manufacturing in accordance with standards. And when the products are provided either directly to the patient or perhaps more consistently with how psychedelics are used, to their healthcare provider, a mechanism that exists but is seldom used in the cannabis system in Canada, that product would be clear, and the healthcare provider as well as the patient would understand how much psilocybin is being used and what form it's in, whether that's a dried fruiting body or an extract, or maybe sort of an edible product, which I think could look like a tea bag with psilocybin mushrooms and maybe other teas in it as well, which is a way that people often use it in any event. And then the other part that the regulations would accomplish, again, following the cannabis blueprint, would be that the decision of whether or not a particular individual is well suited to receive psilocybin for therapeutic purposes would be made by their healthcare practitioner, not by a government official who's perhaps unfamiliar with that person's case other than through an exemption application and who themselves is not a healthcare practitioner. This would increase equality and safety by making access more predictable, and it would be much more efficient for the Canadian taxpayer. So to me, I mean, Canada's done this before with cannabis. We took cannabis another step forward, which was to regulate it for the adult use market. No one's talking about that here. With what we're proposing, the regulations would be made under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. Psilocybin would remain a controlled substance, and that would all be consistent with Canada's obligations under UN drug control conventions. And all that happening without, making waves at the UN or problematically amending the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, problematic from the perspective of our UN compliance. If we do this, it to me is probably the shortest path administratively and effective cost-wise, because a lot of the same infrastructure and a lot of the same skill set that goes to regulating cannabis products and regulating medical access to cannabis, which Canada's been doing for 20 years, can be applied here very effectively to regulate a different type of controlled substance. And again, conscious that cannabis is not a controlled substance in Canada today, but for the majority of the lifespan of our medical cannabis system, it was. And I think the last thing I'd add is that some people are concerned about data and psilocybin. And I think that with the way psilocybin tends to be used therapeutically, there's a lot more contact with the healthcare practitioner than is the case with cannabis. I've had medical access to cannabis since before the Cannabis Act, and my healthcare practitioner barely knew what I was using, or, there was almost no involvement. But with psilocybin, I predict for the typical patient, there will be much higher involvement. And if these regulations were enacted at the federal level, making it possible for a patient to receive this product without any law being broken and making it possible for the products to be made, I think the circumstances under which medical access is given could be controlled very effectively at the provincial level by colleges. And those same colleges could look for data to be acquired as part of the therapeutic access. And so I think a lot of the perhaps lost opportunities with medical cannabis could be corrected here primarily by regulation at the healthcare practitioner level. So I'll leave it there, and always happy to talk about this. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you very much, David. And just to highlight, the things that I want to accentuate there it's a focus on safety and equality and predictability, right? Safety. So as you've said, Erin, that you don't want to have to go out and get an illicit source, from the black market. You want to get a safe substance. And again, the fact that the three of you have all used these substances and been forced to go through an illicit market, not that the illicit market is poison or toxic, but that, that there are people out there who, through these acts and regulations, which are designed to protect you, could have better protected you. I think that's the purpose here, is this is a step in the direction of safety, away from Section 56, which is not as safe, or as equitable or equal as regulations would be. And for sure, I mean, the relative ease of this, that we do have psilocybin regulations that I can attest are pretty much the exact same as what we've put together, makes this administratively simple for Patty Haiju and her team at Health Canada to more or less look at and completely comprehend and understand, because this is the document that they made. So it's really looking at the similarities in cannabis and psilocybin, and trying to understand that, again, we have the infrastructure for this, and that if there's one country in the world, one place where this is most likely to happen and best prepared, it is here on Canadian soil with our health minister, Patty Haiju. Now, something that I also wanted to talk about, and it's really a rhetorical question here, and Erin, I'll start with you here. How would your journey have differed if you had access to psilocybin regulations? If there were regulations here, how do you think it would have been different?
I think it goes to what you were saying about oversight, and what David was saying to a finer point in terms of physician involvement. I agree. I think it would be much more beneficial for my physician to, number one, be trained on the use of psilocybin, with patients, as well as having a physician, a physician's oversight would be incredibly important, and would have been more helpful than me just figuring things out through self-educating, or, groups like Heroic Arts Project. And, you can only do so much on your own. So I think with physician support, it would have been much easier and much more effective.
For sure. And Jared, I'll put it over to you. I mean, something that Erin almost commented or hinted at is, with regulations, my hope is that organizations such as Heroic Arts and TheraPsil might be put out of a job. And to me, it's like that would be the best thing ever, if this wasn't necessary. So over to you. I mean, how do you think your journey would have been different if this had been regulated for you?
Well, there wouldn't have been so much anxiety, I guess, about getting into it. One of the things that we do with Heroic Arts is we know that getting to these ceremonies, as you said, without proper regulation, it's a crapshoot. You don't know if you're going to go into a ceremony with someone who is trained, or someone who's going to manipulate, or any of these things. So we do our due diligence and make sure that that is all taken care of, so the veteran doesn't have to worry about any of that, because that's a huge part of the issue. I think if it was regulated, and it was in our culture, I don't think I would have had to get through as much of the stigma. I wouldn't have felt so weird about talking to it with my friends. It would be just a normal act that I would go through. But I also think that I would just ultimately feel safer. I feel safer that there was somebody out there who had done the due diligence, because that's kind of what he said that the nonprofits are doing right now in this void of no structure with it. It's very scary to move through it. So like Heroic Arts is creating a structure for vets to use, because it's hard to go out by yourself and navigate this underworld of psychedelic medicine.
Well, thank you very much. And Kelsey, I want to put it over to you. I know you've got a hard stop in about 5 minutes here. So I want to direct the question over to you as well. And then I also just want to allow you to say any closing remarks or statements, or anything you want to add that you haven't maybe been able to voice in this panel yet.
So for me, I think, the biggest thing is, I don't know that it didn't have to be this hard. It didn't have to be this much of a struggle, and it didn't have to be this painful. If we were only given guidance and tools, it didn't have to be like this. No vet needs to struggle alone the way that we are. And I think that's what all of us are really here to do. And so, with the regulation and having a doctor to be able to have a conversation with, and not be fearful of ramifications to my family, my business, my, getting access. But not only that, is feeling like I could get a safe product, a product that is consistent, that could be consistent throughout my treatments and therapies, something that my doctor could help me regulate and walk me through. It really comes down to education being the number one thing. It never needed to be this difficult, and it doesn't need to be any longer. we're too smart and too well educated to allow for this behavior and control over something that could heal so many people. If anything, I'm hopeful that as we move forward with people like Heroic Hearts and TheraPsil and Erin and Jared and all these doctors and incredible people that are putting their career and their reputation on the line to help individuals, my only hope is that we can get this through before we lose too many more people. Because at the end of the day, time is running out for a lot of our veterans, a lot of our first responders, especially with COVID. Our first responders are taking a hit unlike anything we've ever seen. And not only that, or so are our treatment doctors, our psychologists and psychiatrists. We're not thinking about the burden they're taking on with everyone else. And so my hope is that through the work you guys are all doing and that you continue to push is that we don't have to lose any more people. We don't need to be hurting the way we're hurting. We're all grown adults here. We should all be able to make grown adult decisions and get a safe and regulated product, something that can be done consistently, safely, and hopefully we can just move forward as a society. There's nothing more that we can do but what we're doing. We can scream and we can yell, and we're going to do that. And at the end of the day, we will get regulation pushed through, and we will finally have the treatment that we all deserve and our vets deserve. And that's really all I have to say.
Well said, and thank you so much for joining this panel, Kelsey. It's really been a pleasure to be able to chat with you and hear your story. And I look forward to working with you in the future and connecting more. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. We're always here to help. Thank you, TheraPsil, Heroic Hearts, Erin, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity. Let's make some serious change, okay?
Take care. Okay, so I think this is a good place to end the discussion portion of the webinar. And Holly, if you want to throw back onto the screen, we'll go through just a bit more about what the folks in this meeting can do in order to advocate, along with what we're working on. We'll thank our sponsors and then get into Q&As. I see there are a couple of questions here that I'm very keen and excited to answer. So just for a moment here, we'll Holly get the presentation back in presentation mode. Thanks, Holly. So we will be continuing these webinars every Wednesday at 4 p.m. PST for the next couple of weeks. And the next webinar, next Wednesday, is also going to be about psilocybin therapy for veterans, part 2. So please stay tuned for who's going to be talking at that event and the flow of that presentation. I hope that everyone at this call can come to that as well, and would encourage you to invite friends and family members and others to join these calls, as this is part of the education that is so important in making sure that the stories, such as these 3 individuals, their stories are heard, because it is the Canadian public that will be the change agent here. So week 5 will likely be substance use disorder and the need for regulations there, and week 6, 7, and 8 will be determined, but there will certainly be cluster headaches put in there, along with anxiety and depression. So one thing is we want to acknowledge is we are a nonprofit and we are kept running and alive by public donations and donations from the public. So at the moment, we do have a fundraiser going, and a big thanks to Dr. Broners, as with every donation, I think over $50, you actually get a little soap. So always asking for donations. But even more importantly is your voice, and your voice does matter. So I would please ask that any veterans that are interested in accessing psilocybin or that are currently using it and looking for a safe way to access it with a trained healthcare professional, please do not hesitate to contact us for access. We also ask that you, if you would like to share this webinar, we'll have it recorded and posted on our website, and that you also tweet and tag the minister. If you don't have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or email, we've got a awesome page on our website right now where you can actually write to your MP through a take action page, and through that voice your opinion to your MP, whose duty it is to inform the rest of the government and parliament. So never think that you can't help. It truly is the way that the first couple of Canadians who were able to get access to psilocybin were helped. It was through social media, it was through individual Canadians writing to the minister and to their MPs. So a big thank you to everyone who was part of this call, and also our donors, Nike Foundation, Apex, Mindcure, PsyGen, Dr. Bronner's Not For My Health, and also a huge thanks, and I'm really happy to be working here with Heroic Hearts. So without further ado, let's get into questions. And I'll just jump into the Q&A here, and we'll just go in order. So the first question, and I'll put it out, I'll read it, and then anyone can jump in and answer on the panel, depending on who would like to. I know that I've got some strong opinions on this, and David, you will as well. And Jared and Erin, I welcome you to answer them as well. So the first one is the quote posted on the TheraPsil Insta from the article: "Clinical trials represent the best option for patients as they protect the best interest of the patients and ensure that the substances are administered in accordance with national and international ethical, medical, and scientific standards." They ask, do you think this is a sign for how Health Canada is going to respond to regulations proposed by you and the CPA? And two, do you think that Health Canada, who themselves regulate clinical trials, need to be educated to understand that clinical trials are extremely restrictive in terms of eligibility criteria, which means this is not an access method? So I put that out to anyone here who would like to answer it, but
I guess I'll start. Just one thing I'd say there is, this is a country where if you want to buy cannabis, you can. Just have to be the correct age in your province. But also sometimes physicians recommend cannabis to people. And this is a system we've had for 20 years, nearly 20 years, is just under, and in one form or another. And that seems to, while it has some drawbacks, just like the prescription drug system has some drawbacks, it's been an effective and simple way for some people to get relief. And as with any therapeutic product that's going to be recommended by a physician, it has to be recommended in a responsible manner. That's true with prescription drugs, and that's also true with cannabis. In my view, with the safety data that exists on psilocybin, and with the data of efficacy for some conditions that exists, it makes sense to me, and I'm not a physician, but it makes sense to me that in some cases, some physicians might be able to safely recommend this to their patients, even without a approved drug product that holds a drug identification number that can be prescribed. And it's not like this is a wild idea that came out of TheraPsil. Again, we've been allowing this with cannabis for about 20 years. What we're talking about here is a substance that in most ways has an even stronger safety profile than cannabis, significantly stronger from a physiological perspective. And most of the dangers of the substance, like there's no such thing as a safe drug, but most of the dangers of psilocybin are mitigatable through oversight and supervision and contact with healthcare practitioners. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's Health Canada's response. That's certainly the simplest response, but not if you prioritize access in a timely and cost-effective manner. And again, bearing in mind that we're talking about a substance with a long, even in modern times, you know, in the way we kind of think about the world for the last 100 years and the way we write things down kind of post-television, you know, a lot of use, in some cases under extremely irresponsible circumstances, with again, adverse events being in general things that can be avoided with responsible use, which is what would be happening here. So I think this is a substance where it just might thread that unusual needle, and with its history and all the data available to it, where medical access per se, not prescription drug, makes sense. I don't think that rules out prescription drugs. I really hope there are prescription drugs with psilocybin and with other psychedelics that become available and that can be paid for in a simple way through insurance. I just think that the two systems can exist next to each other. And I think we have a great precedent with cannabis.
Thank you very much, David. And I can't help but agree and try to point to the fact that clinical trials are one track, and what we're asking for here is actually a separate track. Right, the fact that there are Canadians who are today using these substances and today need help, not in 5 years, not in 10 years. So it's true, and I will say this again, that we live on the shoulders of giants here in Canada because of what we've accomplished over the past 20 years, and it sets us apart. It makes us global leaders, and right now we have the opportunity to lead again and to fulfill the constitutional rights of or charter rights of Canadians, and to make sure that those who are using these substances are not only is it made not illegal for them, but that they are fully supported. So thanks. Another question here: what is the approximate timeline of getting all these initiatives reviewed, approved, and put into work for patients? So I guess in essence, how long might this take, this regulatory process? And again, David, this is something I might ask you. However, as far as I'm aware, that it really is a question of, well, it depends on when the government decides to take this seriously, when they decide to respond. And again, what I can say is that in court cases in the past, usually the courts will rule that the government has, when forced to make regulations, about 6 months. That being said, anything is possible. And when a group gives you the regulations in your hand, maybe it takes a little bit less time because you've already got them there. Anything you want to add to that, David or Jared? Or
no, you captured it from my perspective. I would love to hear from the rest of the panel, but it just, like you said, if it's a priority, it'll happen. I would, COVID is kind of the topic of the last 18 months. I think it's safe to say COVID has exacerbated certain mental health conditions. And I think it's safe to say that COVID has reduced our total economy. So it seems to me that a cost-effective and efficacious and safe approach is probably a good thing to think about. I mean, we've certainly seen other unusual approaches to healthcare made in the last 18 months. I think regulated access to psilocybin would be, kind of par for the course if you really think broadly about everything we've seen in the last 2 years.
With the studies that are happening in the United States, also with MAPS, psilocybin, and Rinehart, Harris, and all that, it has been predicted that psilocybin will most likely be regulated, legalized, decriminalized, something along those lines in the next 3 to 5 years in the United States. Just based upon like the FDA's breakthrough declaration about like breakthrough therapy for PTSD and breakthrough therapy for depression, and same with MDMA has been considered this as well. So with these medicines coming through, I don't think that it will be much longer, but that's where the issue comes in. As Spencer said, we have people now who are hurting, and unfortunately these processes take some time. But I think that this is what we do to help that process, is just come out of the psychedelic closet, so to speak, change the zeitgeist of the culture so people know, just like when we did with cannabis, it became a joke. It was on TV. Everyone smoked, presidents and prime ministers, and everybody smoked cannabis. It's funny. But once everyone starts to realize it's a thing that people use for healing, I think that changes the whole community or the zeitgeist of the problem or the issue. And then that makes the people in administration go, this is a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing this? So I think that this is part of that process, is just by speaking out and telling our stories and letting the community around us know that it's not a shameful act. It's something that we are using for ourselves, for healing, and to expand our consciousness.
Thank you very much. And it's great. It's always good to report back on why this is needed today, right? It's because, as you said, people are using it today. And specifically in this case, right, those who serve the country, right, are using it today and need that help. So the country needs to serve back. Now, it's 5 o'clock here. So I want to end on time, but also want to make sure that we get all of these questions answered too. So Holly, if it's okay, if you could maybe record these, we can either move them to the next session, as I think they're all going to carry over. Thank you very much. And we'll make sure we get all of them answered. But other than that, I just want to again say thank you so much, Jared and Erin and David and Kelsey. If you're watching a recording of this, thank you so much. I'll be sure to give my thanks to her again. And of course, thank you to everyone who attended this meeting. Again, it's really from the bottom of my heart and everyone at TheraPsil, and I'm sure everyone on this panel. The reason change happens and the reason that we've come as far as we have with getting exemptions for patients and healthcare practitioners is because of other Canadians who care and are willing to share webinars like this, videos like this, and to raise their voice. So this is all possible, and I think as Kelsey had said, is it's just a matter of time. The regulations will come, and so thank you guys all for helping hopefully hurry that on a little bit sooner. Thank you everyone for showing up to webinar 3, the TheraPsil campaign for Veterans Week, and I look forward to seeing everyone next week, also for part 2 of the Veterans campaign. Thank you so much.